It was a quiet village, far from the busy city. Not many people lived there. The air was cool, and the sky often grey. Trees surrounded the village, like tall guards, and at night, they whispered strange sounds. But one thing made the village famous. It was the story of the woman in white. They said, she walked alone, only at night she appeared. When the moon was high, dressed in a white gown. Some people saw her on the road, others near the river. Her face was always hidden by her long hair. No one knew her name or why she wandered, but everyone was afraid of her. Tom was new in the village. He had moved there to start a new life, away from the noise of the city. Tom didn't believe in ghosts. He liked the peace of the village, but soon he would learn the truth about the woman in white. One evening, after work, Tom decided to take a walk. The air was cool, and the village was quiet. He walked down a path leading to the woods. As he walked, he heard a soft cry. He stopped and listened. The cry was soft, like a whisper, and it came from the trees. Tom looked around. No one was there, he thought. It was just his imagination. But the cry continued. It grew louder and closer. He felt a chill run down his back. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, a figure in white, standing just beyond the trees. Tom froze. He couldn't move. The woman in white stood still, not far from him. Her head was down, and her long hair covered her face. She was silent now, but her presence was strong. The air felt colder. Tom wanted to leave, but his legs wouldn't move. He stared at the woman, trying to understand what he was seeing. Was this a real person, or was it the ghost everyone talked about? Suddenly, the woman lifted her head. Her face was pale, and her eyes were sad. She looked directly at Tom, and for a moment, he felt like she was asking for help. But before he could do anything, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Tom stood there, still in shock. He had heard the stories, but he never thought they were true. Now, he had seen her with his own eyes. The woman in white was real, but who was she? And why was she haunting the village? That night, Tom couldn't sleep. His mind was full of questions. He had to know more about the ghost. He decided to talk to some of the older people in the village. They might know more about her. The next day, Tom went to the local cafe. Old Mr. Harris was sitting by the window, sipping his tea. Mr. Harris had lived in the village his whole life. If anyone knew about the woman in white, it would be him. Tom sat down beside him. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I saw her last night." Mr. Harris looked up slowly. "You saw who, lad?" "The woman in white." Mr. Harris' face grew serious. He put down his tea and leaned closer. "You saw her, did you, eh? She has been around 4 years. No one knows where she came from. Some say she was once a young woman, heartbroken by a lost love. Others say she drowned in the river, and now she walks the earth, searching for peace." Tom listened closely. He needed to know more. "Has anyone ever spoken to her?" Mr. Harris shook his head. "No one has brave enough to get close. She disappears before you can. But I have heard stories. Some say she's looking for someone. Others say she's trapped between this world and the next. But one thing's for sure, she's not at peace." Tom thanked Mr. Harris and left the cafe. He couldn't stop thinking about the ghost. Was she really looking for someone? Or was she cursed to wander forever? Tom didn't want to believe in curses, but he couldn't shake the feeling that There was more to the story. That night, he decided to go back to the woods where he had seen her. It was late when he left his house. The village was quiet, and the only sound was the wind rustling the leaves. Tom made his way to the same path he had walked the night before. As he neared the woods, he felt the air grow cold again. His heart raced, but he kept walking. He had to know more. Then, just as before, he heard the soft cry. It was faint at first, but it grew louder as he walked deeper into the trees, and there she was, standing in the same spot as the night before. This time, Tom was ready. "Who are you?" he called out. "What do you want?" The woman in white didn't move. She stood there, silent and still. Tom took a step closer. "Please," he said. "I want to help you." The woman lifted her head again, and this time, her face was clearer. She looked sad, but there was something else in her eyes, fear. Before Tom could say another word, she turned and vanished into the trees once more. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. He knew now that the woman wasn't just a ghost. She was trapped, and she needed help. But how could he help her? The next day, Tom decided to visit the local library. He wanted to learn more about the village's history. Maybe there was something in the past that could explain the woman in white. The library was small, but it held many old books and records. Tom spent hours searching through old newspapers and documents. Finally, he found something. An old article from over 100 years ago. The article told the story of a young woman named Evelyn. She had lived in the village long ago. Evelyn had fallen in love with a man from another town, but her family didn't approve. One night, she disappeared, and no one saw her again. Some people believed she had run away with her lover. Others thought she had drowned in the river. Tom's heart raced as he read the story. Could Evelyn be the woman in white? Was she the one wandering the village, searching for the love she had lost? Tom knew he had to do something. If the woman in white was Evelyn, maybe she was still searching for peace. He decided to go to the river where the story said she might have drowned. It was a quiet evening when Tom arrived at the river. The water was calm, and the moonlight reflected off the surface. He stood by the edge, waiting. After a while, he heard the familiar cry. It was soft, but it grew louder as the woman in white appeared by the water. Tom stepped forward. "Evelyn," he called out. "Is that your name?" The woman turned to face him. For the first time, she didn't disappear. Instead, she slowly walked toward him. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but also hope. "I know your story," Tom said. "You were looking for someone, weren't you? You were waiting for peace." The woman in white nodded slowly. Tears filled her eyes. Tom felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. "You don't have to wander anymore," he said. "It's time to rest." The woman smiled faintly, and then, in a soft whisper, she said, "Thank you." And with that, she slowly faded away into the night. Then, the village grew peaceful. After Tom's encounter with the woman in white, for several weeks, there were no more sightings. People were relieved, thinking the ghost had finally found peace. But Tom wasn't sure. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Why had she smiled at him before disappearing? It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. One afternoon, while walking through the village, Tom overheard some villagers talking. "Did you hear about the strange lights near the river?" one man said. Yeah, I heard it's the woman in white again. A woman whispered, but I thought she was gone. Tom's heart raced. Strange lights. Could it be that the ghost had returned? He decided to investigate again. Maybe there was more to her story than he realized. That evening, Tom went back to the river. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the water. The wind was cold, and the trees swayed gently. Tom felt a chill in the air. He stood by the edge of the river, waiting. At first, everything was quiet. But then, just as the villagers had said, he saw it, a strange light, flickering near the trees. It wasn't bright, but it moved slowly, like it was floating. Tom's heart pounded. He moved closer to the light. But as he did, it disappeared. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, "Help me." Tom froze. The voice was soft, like a breeze. But it was clear. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaking. There was no answer, only the sound of the wind and the gentle flow of the river. Tom took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I want to help you," he said. "Tell me what you need." Suddenly, the light appeared again, brighter this time, and it floated towards him. Tom followed the light, his heart racing. It led him deep into the woods, where the trees were thicker and the air was colder. As Tom followed the strange light, he noticed something odd. The trees seemed to part, revealing a narrow path that he had never seen before. It was hidden by overgrown vines and bushes, but the light showed him the way. Tom hesitated for a moment. Should he follow? Was it safe? He had already seen the ghost of the woman in white, but this felt different. It felt more dangerous, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He stepped onto the path, pushing aside the vines and branches. The light flickered ahead of him, leading him deeper into the woods. As he walked, the air grew colder. The trees became taller and darker. Tom felt like he was walking into a different world. And then he saw something strange. At the end of the path, there was an old, abandoned house. The house was small and covered in moss. The windows were broken, and the door hung open. It looked like no one had lived there for years. But the light, the strange light that had led him here, hovered near the door. Tom's heart raced. Why had the light brought him here? Was this house connected to the woman in white? Slowly, Tom walked toward the house. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under his feet. There was a strange feeling inside the house, like the air was heavier, like something was watching him. In the corner of the room, there was a table. On the table, there was an old, worn-out book. Tom picked it up. The cover was faded, but the title was still visible. The Lost Souls. Tom opened the book carefully. The pages were yellow with age, and the writing was faded. But as he turned the pages, he saw something strange. The book was full of names, dates, and stories of people who had disappeared in the village. Some names were from many years ago, but others were recent. Tom's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Near the end of the book, he found a name that shocked him. Evelyn Taylor. It was the same name from the old newspaper article. The woman who had disappeared long ago. The woman who had become the woman in white. But there was something else. Next to her name, there was a date. It wasn't the date she had disappeared. It was a date in the future, a date that hadn't happened yet. Tom stared at the date. What did it mean? Was this some kind of curse? And why was there a date in the future? Before he could think any more, the light flickered again. Brighter this time. It floated toward the back of the house, as if it was trying to lead him somewhere else. Tom followed the light to the back of the house, where he found a small, hidden door. It was old and covered in dust, like no one had opened it in years. The light hovered near the door, flickering softly. Tom hesitated. He wasn't sure what he would find behind the door, but he had come this far. He had to know the truth. He pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, and a cold gust of air hit him. Behind the door, there was a narrow staircase, leading down into the darkness. The light floated down the stairs, and Tom followed. As he descended, the air grew colder, and the darkness thickened around him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept going. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a small room. The walls were made of stone, and the floor was covered in dirt. In the center of the room, there was a large, old chest. The chest was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. Tom pulled at it, and with a little force, it broke. He slowly opened the chest, and inside, he found something that took his breath away. It was full of old letters, photographs, and small trinkets. They looked like they belonged to someone from a long time ago. As Tom sorted through the items, he realized that they were all connected to Evelyn. One of the letters caught his eye. It was written in neat handwriting, addressed to Evelyn's lover, the man she had tried to run away with. The letter was full of love and promises, but it was never sent. Tom's heart ached as he read it. This must have been what Evelyn was searching for, her lost love. But there was something else. At the bottom of the chest, it was a small, silver necklace. Tom picked it up, and as soon as he touched it, the room grew colder. He knew, without a doubt, that this necklace belonged to the woman in white. Suddenly, the light that had been guiding Tom flickered violently. The air around him grew colder, and he felt a presence in the room. He turned around, and there she was, the woman in white. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, her long white gown flowing behind her. Her face was still hidden by her hair, but Tom could feel her sadness. He held up the necklace. "Is this yours?" he asked softly. The woman in white lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she nodded. Tom stepped forward and placed the necklace in her hand. As soon as he did, the room seemed to grow warmer. The cold air faded, and the light around the ghost grew brighter. For a moment, Tom thought she would finally find peace. But then, the ground beneath him began to shake. The walls trembled, and the light flickered wildly. Something was wrong. The shaking grew stronger, and Tom could hear the sound of cracking stone. The room was falling apart. He had to get out, but the woman in white was still standing there, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, deep and menacing. "You should not have come here," it said. Tom's heart raced. The voice wasn't coming from the ghost. It was coming from the shadows. Tom looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. The shadows in the room grew darker, almost alive. He felt trapped, like the air was closing in on him. The woman in white, still holding the necklace, stepped back, fear filling her eyes. "Who's there?" Tom shouted, his voice trembling. The ground kept shaking, and the walls cracked more with each passing second. The voice didn't answer right away, but the shadows moved, swirling around Tom and the ghost. Finally, the voice spoke again, louder this time. You have disturbed the past. Now you will pay the price. Tom's heart pounded. He wasn't sure what to do. I didn't mean any harm, he said. I was just trying to help her. The voice laughed, a cold, cruel laugh. You think you can help her? You have no idea what you've done. Tom looked at the woman in white. Her sad eyes were now full of fear. Whatever this voice was, it wasn't just a ghost. It was something darker, something more dangerous. The walls of the basement started crumbling, and dust filled the air. Tom knew he had to get out before the entire house collapsed on top of him. He grabbed the woman in white by the hand, pulling her toward the stairs. We have to leave, he shouted, over the sound of the cracking walls. But the woman in white hesitated. She looked back at the shadows, as if she was tied to them. I can't leave, she whispered. I'm bound to this place. Tom didn't know what she meant, but he wasn't going to leave her behind. Come on, he said, tugging her hand. You don't have to stay here anymore. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to resist, but then she stepped forward. Together, they ran up the stairs, the shadows following them. The voice echoed behind them, growing angrier. You can't escape. Aston and the woman in white reached the top of the stairs. The house began to shake more violently. The ceiling cracked, and debris started falling. Tom shielded the ghost with his body as they ran for the front door. When they finally burst through the door and into the cold night air, Tom felt a wave of relief. They were outside, away from the crumbling house. But the danger wasn't over yet. The ground outside the house began to split open, and dark smoke rose from the cracks. Tom looked back at the house, and to his horror, the shadows were spilling out, crawling across the ground toward them. We need to keep moving, he said, pulling the woman in white away from the house. But the ghost stopped. She turned to face the shadows, her eyes filled with determination. This is my fight, she said. I have to end it. Tom didn't understand what was happening, but he could see the fear in the woman in white's eyes had turned to resolve. She stepped toward the shadows, her white gown glowing in the moonlight. The dark voice returned, mocking her. You think you can stop me? You've been trapped 4 years. You're too weak. The woman in white lifted her head, and for the first time, Tam saw her fully. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. She wasn't the same sad ghost who had wandered the village. She was stronger now, ready to face whatever darkness had been haunting her. Tom wanted to help, but he didn't know how. All he could do was watch as the woman in white faced the shadows, the ground trembling beneath their feet. With a voice that was both soft and powerful, she spoke. You no longer control me, she said. I am free. As the woman in white spoke those words, the shadows seemed to hesitate. The dark smoke that had been rising from the ground slowed, and the voice grew quieter. No, the voice screamed. You belong to me. But a woman in white stood her ground. She held out the necklace, the same one Tom had found in the chest, and it glowed brightly in her hand. The light from the necklace grew stronger, cutting through the darkness. The shadows recoiled, shrinking away from the light. The voice screamed again, but it was weaker now, fading with each passing second. Tom watched in awe as the woman in white pushed back the darkness. For so long, she had been trapped, bound by some unknown force, but now she was breaking free. The light from the necklace continued to grow, and soon the shadows were gone. The dark voice was silenced, and the ground stopped shaking. The cold air that had surrounded them began to warm, and the sky above them cleared. The woman in white turned to Tom, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have helped me find my freedom." Tom smiled, relieved that the danger had passed. "I didn't do much," he said. "You did it yourself." The woman in white shook her head. "You gave me the strength to face my past. Without you, I would still be lost." Tom didn't know what to say. He had come to solve a mystery, but he had ended up doing much more. He had helped a lost soul find peace. With the curse lifted, the woman in white began to fade. Her form grew lighter, almost transparent, as if she was finally being released from the world of the living. "I can finally rest," she said, her voice soft and calm. Tom felt a pang of sadness. He had grown to care for this ghostly figure, and now she was leaving. But he knew it was for the best. She had been trapped for so long, and now she was free. "Goodbye," Tom said, his voice heavy with emotion. The woman in white smiled one last time before disappearing completely. The air around Tom grew still, and the village, once haunted by her presence, was now peaceful. Tom returned to the village the next day. He expected things to feel different, but everything seemed the same. The villagers went about their daily lives, unaware of the battle that had taken place the night before. But Tom knew, he knew that the woman in white was gone, and the village was safe again. He visited the spot by the river where he had first seen her. The water was calm, and the air was warm. There was no sign of the strange lights or the cold wind. The ghost was truly gone. Tom felt a sense of closure. He had helped her find peace, and in doing so, he had found peace himself. Even though the woman in white was gone, her story didn't end. Tom knew that there were other mysteries in the world, other souls who needed help. He had discovered something important during his journey. Sometimes, the past doesn't let go easily, but with courage, kindness, and determination, even the darkest stories can find a resolution. And so, Tom's journey wasn't over. The village may have been peaceful now, but he knew there would always be more stories to uncover, more mysteries to solve, and more souls to help. This was only the beginning. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out more interesting English stories on this channel.